Alright, hello everybody. So this is going to be a pretty quick video. There's one topic I wanted to cover, but before I get to that, I want to announce, if you haven't already heard, that I have mirrored my channel over on Odysee. I'll put a link to that underneath. If you want to just look it up yourself, it's Length Unither Uncut, all one word, on Odysee. I did the mirroring yesterday. I've been getting urged to do that for a while, and kind of ironically, I got attacked by a little mob, a tiny little mob, but it doesn't take many people to flag your videos for stuff to be gone. So I didn't want that to happen. YouTube has been declining in terms of a platform to have meaningful discussions, and so it just made sense. I'm sure that there are other possible platforms. People have been suggesting others, and I'm sure Odysee has its issues. I've noticed that it does seem a little glitchy, but the mirroring process was pretty easy and went very well. It took maybe 5 or 10 minutes to start the process, and then all last night it was mirroring my channel. I don't know if everything is there. There were limitations on how much you could mirror based on your subscriber count, and I had enough to overcome almost all the hurdles, but not quite. So I think I had something like 650 videos, and I think something like 300, I don't know, 400 or maybe 500 have been mirrored, but we'll see. I'll put a link in the description, and I do recommend everyone go check it out. That seems like a much more open platform. There's way more stuff there. It's not being censored the way that YouTube is. And the other thing too, I mean, a couple things all happened at once. People have been telling me to do this. It just made sense. There was nothing philosophically against it. I had this, again, minor twist. What happened is somebody on some other YouTube channel, who I don't know anything about, I've never seen, I'd never followed, never heard of, who was a men's rights activist and a men going their own way activist, which, I mean, I'm not, but whatever, posted one of my videos and just said, look at this degenerate, and a whole bunch of his, not a whole bunch, but several of his followers just went and started trashing the video without even watching it, which is fine, whatever. Negative comments happen. People are stupid and say things without even knowing what they're talking about. But, they start flagging stuff, they start pulling stuff down, and it's a problem. Then the other thing, too, is YouTube has taken down some of my videos. A friend of mine asked about one, and I was like, oh, yeah, I have a video on that, and I went, and it's gone. And it's on a topic that I'm not surprised it gotten taken down. So, I'll put a link, and if you're interested, absolutely go check it out. I don't think you have to be a member of Odysee to watch, or Library, because Odysee is part of Library. I would just say, if you haven't started to diversify your platforms, it's a good idea to, and I should have done it a while ago. But enough on that. Let me get on to what I wanted to talk about here. So this is going to be Free State related news, and I would say it's hilarious and good news. So a few weeks ago, I posted a video about the Free State budget. The Speaker of the House in the House of Representatives in New Hampshire is a Free Stater, very active Free Stater. I don't know him personally, but I've been seeing him at PorkFest for as long as I've been going. He goes to my gym, and he's a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist who just also happens to be a Republican in the New Hampshire State House. 25% of the legislature are New Hampshire Liberty Alliance members, which means they are either Free Staters or they are locked into their political caucus, and 25% is huge. I think I did the math at one point. Free Staters are overrepresented. Free Staters are like 0.2% of the population, but they make up 25% of the legislature, which makes their overrepresentation just absolutely astounding. But this is enough to have an influence, and they passed a state budget, which is one that both cut taxes and cut spending even more, so it's a balanced budget. They banned critical race theory, and then they also had a program, a voucher program, to pay people to take their kids out of public school. Now, that was passed, and now that program is becoming too popular. Too many people want to leave. So I'll put a link also underneath the new channel. So I'll put the new channel first. But underneath that, I'll put a link to this article. There's a short little video from a local news station. Critics of New Hampshire's school voucher program say it will cost millions. ironic there, the critics of that program are going to be for public schools and public school teachers and public school unions. In fact, many of them will be teachers and union members, and education costing millions is never a problem for them. In fact, they want it to cost more. That's one of their primary goals. So that's probably almost certainly an ironic statement from, who the people making it, unless that's an anarchist saying that. Like if I had my druthers, I don't think the state should be giving out voucher programs, but it's better than forcing them just to go to public school. And if you say, well, we'll pay, well, we'll get into this. So New Hampshire's just implemented school voucher program is drawing new cost concerns as more families than expected may take advantage. Now, this is something I didn't know earlier. They budgeted it. They estimated 28 students would apply for this year. 28. Now, I have no idea where they got that number. Is that like the number of families in the State House who wanted to do it? Because it's actually smaller. Like 25% of the legislature is more than 28. So that sounds like that's just the people in the legislature taking advantage, but we'll see. Then Betsy DeVos was in the state. The less said about her, the better, I think. Even though she's next door neighbors with my fucking cousin back in Michigan. But the cost to taxpayers is an ongoing concern. Critics said that the program was presented to the legislature as likely involving 28 students this year. Since Friday, 1,500 families have inquired. Now, inquire doesn't mean they're going to do it, but this is like free money for them. So it would make sense if a lot of them did this. So like what was billed was $130,000. So I guess if you take it's a $4,600 subsidy, basically to take your kid to either homeschool them or send them to private school, including a religious school. So, if we do, I'm just going to double check their math here. Who knows, right? 4,600 times 28. It's 128,000, so they see 130,000. But 1,500 times 4,600 is, yes, well, that's not that much. That's 6,900,000. So I don't know where they're getting. What was presented as a state financial exposure is 70 million, and we are now 7 million towards that. Oh, okay. So the 6,900,000, that is the current, if those all 1,500 families do it. Where they're getting the $70 million figure is if every family that this applies to does it. Now the subsidy has limits. It's basically means tested. So if you're outside of certain wealth brackets, then you can't apply for it. And I think they're getting the 70 million as if everybody within those brackets decided to go, that would be 70 million, which we can now estimate that if that's I mean, that's obviously a rough number, but 70 million divided by 4600. It's 15,200-ish. So let's say 15,000 families that meet that. So, a couple things about these numbers. So 1,500 at one level doesn't seem like a lot, but it does seem a lot more than 28. And the other thing is you have to remember that New Hampshire is a relatively small state, both geographically and in terms of population. The population of New Hampshire, I believe, is like in the 1.3 million area. So this is smaller than many cities and many metropolitan areas. I'm sure there's entire boroughs in New York City that have more people. And so, while 1,500 might not be a lot in, say, Ohio or New York or California or Texas, in New Hampshire, that's a substantial population. In fact, it sounds like, that's about 10%. 1,500 is about 10% of the qualifying families. And I don't know, like, what the what percentage of the populace falls into the category, like how poor do you have to be, basically. But I would imagine it's fairly broad. So, we could be talking about potentially, 10% or more of the students in the state leaving the public schools, which would be wonderful. And it would, where they're getting the cost here is interesting, because $4,600, wow, we're giving out that for each student. But when a student's in public school, they give out more than that. If you look up, and I looked it up just before this, New Hampshire spends on average, and it depends on the town or whatever, but on average $17,400 per year per student. So $4,600 is a thrifty bargain, and that would, if they correspondingly reduced the cost. So let's say we'll take that number, 17,400. No. Sorry for the pocket calculations. Okay. So that would be a net savings of $12,800 per student. Right, so the more they do this, the cheaper it will be. Like if you took this to the logical conclusion and had every student do this, there would be a massive decrease. We'd have let's see. Yeah, there'd be basically a 75% reduction in the total costs of education in the state. If every single student in the public schools got $4,600 to attend a private school or a home school of their choice, and they just closed all the public schools, then there'd be a 75% reduction in the cost, which would be wonderful and better for everything. The problem there is that Keynes said that wages are sticky, and no wages are more sticky than public sector workers, and especially public sector union workers, which are what almost all teachers are. Almost all teachers are members of one of the two big teachers unions, the NEA or the AFL, American Federation of Teachers, OT or whatever. Like, there's two big ones. The NEA is the biggest one, National Education Association, and probably a New Hampshire affiliate, probably the EA, something like that, NEA. But they tend to not, one of the bad things about public schools is when they have fewer students. If fewer students go, they don't really see that affect their funding that much, because so much is tied up into things that aren't related to the number of students. There's so much that's administration. There's so many fixed costs, and they have all of these obligations to pay, former teachers, to pay into their retirement funds and their medical billing, that it's just its connection to the number of students is kind of tenuous. But when they're saying there could be a financial exposure of $70 million, I think that's if they're assuming all the kids go. And then also, just because they're spending $4,600 on a student doesn't mean that they're actually subtracting the rest of that. And I don't know. It's not clear in the piece here. And I feel like if they're going to talk about the financing of it, that would make a lot of sense, because that would be important. Among the pieces of legislation the critics plan to put forth are one that would cap the expenditures to what was initially put forth to the legislature, and another that would ask the Attorney General's office to watch for fraud. Right? We don't want too many people to leave. Like, they have to keep the public schools going. We have to watch out for fraud, but we don't have to watch out for fraud in the public schools, which it's not like that's not a problem, right? I mean, my high school passed a bond issue to build a new high school, and the outgoing superintendent retired and took a $250,000 a year job as an advisor to the school board. and they started building a football stadium in the year 2000 when I was a sophomore. They plowed the field, graded it, built a track, built a berm, built a field house, put up the lights, turned on the lights, tested them, left them on for a week to see that they worked, and then they stopped all construction, and it's still there, and they've still never used it 21 years later. How much did all that cost? Who built it? Who got billed for that? Right? Well, the people of a small town had to pay for all that, and maybe there was some fraud there. I've got a friend, one of my gay connections here, who not currently but for a long time was an auditor for municipalities in New Hampshire, and he was going through all the scandals, and he said that some of the schools are the worst. So the schools do all kinds of misappropriations, but again, I'm sure these legislator critics, who are certainly Democrats, aren't worried about that. Okay, yeah. State Education Commissioner Frank Edelblut said that 70,000 students in the Granite State are financially eligible, but nationally only a small percentage take advantage. He claimed the program will actually be a net savings to taxpayers, which I think, depending on the implementation, would make total sense. It should be totally possible. In New Hampshire, we pay about $20,000 a year. So I looked it up. It said $17,400. So he's rounding a little bit, but. And when a student elects for an education freedom account, about $5,000 of that will follow the student, and $15,000 will stay in the local community. Not sure what he means by that. Let me look. How many students are in New Hampshire public schools? Okay, so that's an old number. It says in 2013, New Hampshire had 188,900, so let's say 190,000 students enrolled in 481 schools. Okay, that's a really old number. I wonder what it is now. So let's call that 190. So 70,000 was not that big of a stretch of that. Well, 190,000. Okay, so it sounds like if everyone who qualified left, it'd be something like 35 or 40% of the students would be leaving the public school, which would be fucking fantastic. Not saying that's going to happen. And here's the other interesting thing about public schools, and this is true with a lot of policy things, where people will virtue signal and people don't ever want to say, everyone wants to be for education, everyone wants to be for the teachers, everyone wants to say public schools are great because the idea of free education sounds really good and sounds really progressive, and you sound like a jerk if you're not for it. But then people look at and they realize the shortcomings, and most people only realize a tiny fraction of the shortcomings, but even that is enough, and they say, well, whatever, in principle, I believe in this, but for my kid, I want them to have the best that they can reasonably have, and the best that they can reasonably have is almost never a public school. It's going to be either a private school or homeschool or unschooling or something, right? And your ability to craft some kind of optimal pedagogy for a student in a public school is virtually nil. Now, it's not particularly easy with private schools either. I think private schools are ethically totally different and practically speaking are better. They do teach, have higher test scores for whatever that is even worth for less money. That's true. But they also don't really cater that much. I mean, it's difficult unless you're going to like a really elite, like a boarding school, to really do that. Of which there are some in New Hampshire. That is an option for some people. Although $4,600 wouldn't even come close to covering your tuition at St. Paul's School. But a lot of people do recognize, I mean, you get this a lot. You have all these like progressive liberals who public schools, but their kids don't go to public schools. These politicians, their kids don't go to public schools, like the powerful ones. So, that's definitely a real trend. It's been ingrained in our culture that it's just the conservative right thing to do to have public schools and that they're a great equalizer. That's the belief. It's completely wrong. Like if you really look into public schools, they clearly don't help poor people. Poor people don't enter public schools as downtrodden, distraught, dysfunctional, poor kids from dysfunctional families, and they go to the public school and they get uplifted and become really good at math, and then they get scholarships to go to Ivy League schools and become professors. No. I mean, there's 330 million people in America, so I'm sure you can find examples of that, but they're not statistically significant at all. Public schools systematically fail poor kids. They do fine if you're from a fine background, if you have two parents and they're middle income or above and they're not totally dysfunctional, public schools can be fine for you. But if that's your background, then you didn't need public schools. Like it's helping the people who don't need to be helped. It's not helping the people that ostensibly it helps for. And also, if you're going to make an argument that, well, what about, there's people out there whose parents, they can't afford private school. They don't have the ability to be, they don't have the skill or the knowledge or the smarts to be a homeschool parent, which people are overestimating what that takes. You don't have to be an expert to teach because you're just making materials available or finding other experts that sometimes nowadays you can find for free because of the internet, right? There's free tutorials. And I mean, there's entire websites dedicated to making that information completely free and available to everybody now. But even in the past, it wasn't that difficult to go to the library and figure it out for what you'd want to teach anyway. There were limitations to that, but it was more than enough scope for most people's educational needs. It's not true. But then, or even worse, the parents simply are so checked out they don't even give a damn about the student's education. Okay, fine. You've just made an argument for having the government run a charity school for the people who can't go to anything else. That is not an argument for compulsory education for everybody, right? You have welfare for people who need it. You don't have welfare for everyone. And here's the other thing. Everyone wants to say schools are great, but if they're so great, why are they compulsory, right? So there's this thin veneer of like, well, everyone loves them, but like the second they're not required, people are not going to go. A huge number of people are just going to stop going. And this is wonderful. 1,700 is a really, really good start. 28 is like proof of concept. It's like whatever. 1,500, 1,700, that's a really good start. And presumably the program will grow after that, which will be wonderful. And if they're actually cutting funding, and I don't know what percentage of the funding comes from the state and what percentage comes from the various towns, and it probably varies from town to town, so who knows. But these parents are still, most of the taxes in New Hampshire come from property taxes. So if you still live in the state, you're still paying property taxes, which means you're still supporting the schools, which means if your kids are out of the schools, that means there's fewer people there, which means the teacher-student ratio is quote-unquote better. Of course, when the teachers unions talk about increasing the ratio, having there be fewer students per teacher, what they really mean is just having there be more teachers because they're a union and they want to grow the union. And they've successfully done that, for 100 years now. But this is really good news. I was really pleased to see this. I hope that the program continues to grow. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to cap this or to stop this process. And if we can start getting a significant percentage of the kids out of the public schools, that will save taxpayers money. That will help, to some extent, the students who are still there, right? To the extent that that is a valid idea, that fewer students per teacher is good for education, which it's kind of an interesting thing to actually debate. Peter Boghossian in his book, The Apple Inside the Worm, about the teachers union, points out like, well, wouldn't it, typically we feel like it's better when one person can do more, right? If you have one person at a factory who can build 100 cars versus one car, you would say that's better. Why do we not feel that way about education? It's an interesting observation. I don't know if they're necessarily analogous that simply, but that is the logic of the teachers unions. That is the logic of most people, that if you had fewer students per teacher, it would be better. And so if 5 or 10 or 20 or 30% of the students leave the public schools to get their education in private schools, which with more students chasing those dollars, they should go down in price if they're not being regulated out of the ability to increase production or homeschooling. Then that should help the people who are still there, and it'll help the people who have left, and everyone will be better off, except for the teachers' unions and the people who have a shibboleth towards public education that it can never change and that it always needs to be there and that it's the most important thing ever. These people just need to get over their religion. So, all right, people. So check out the Odysee channel, link in the description. I'll put a link to the article as well. And thank you all very much, and have a great day. Goodbye.